Paul Krashik served in the United States Army from 1966 until 1974. His experience in the armed forces during the Vietnam War led him to discouraging his daughter Darlene from following in his footsteps and enlisting in the Army after she graduated high school in 1985. His wife Betty Lou, fearing for Darlene's safety, also tried to talk her out of enlisting. However, Darlene was very headstrong and was determined to follow through with her plans. She did join the Army, and in 1987, she was stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado. She had achieved the rank of specialist and was assigned to the 73rd Maintenance Company. On March 16, 1987, 20-year-old Darlene and several other members of her unit went out to Shuffles, a club on South Academy Boulevard in Colorado Springs that was popular with soldiers from Fort Carson. The group spent the evening dancing and having a few drinks together. Because they had worked the next morning, most of the group went home early that night, but Darlene stayed later than the rest of her friends. The last known sighting of Darlene was sometime between midnight and 1 a.m., when a witness saw her leave the club. At approximately 5:20 that morning, March 17, 1987, two police officers were conducting early morning business checks. Near the dumpster in the alley behind the Korean club restaurant, they discovered a woman's body. The woman was nude, save for her gray pants, which were pulled down to her ankles, and one sock. She had a black rope around her neck and a wire hanger around her head. The officers found a driver's license nearby, and it identified the woman as Darlene Krashik. The location where she was found was on the same road as Shuffles, approximately a mile south of it. Authorities did not believe that the alley was the site of the crime. Rather, they believed that Darlene's body had just been left there. Darlene had been severely beaten, but her autopsy would show that she had died as a result of strangulation. She had also been sexually assaulted. According to those who knew Darlene, she had a heart of gold and was willing to provide help to anyone who needed it. No one could provide investigators with leads about anyone who would have wanted to hurt her or any potential motives for her murder. She was well liked in her community and had a close group of friends, but no known enemies. She had not gotten into any sort of argument or altercation with anyone at the club the last night she was alive that could have escalated into violence. Army CID and the Colorado Springs Police Department interviewed hundreds of people, both soldiers and civilians. They identified a handful of persons of interest, but were unable to make any arrests, and the case ultimately went cold. While they were unable to pinpoint an exact motive for the crime, investigators did speculate, based on the last phone conversation Darlene had with her mother, that her death may have had something to do with the Army. Just weeks before her death, Darlene was excited about her future in the Army and the opportunities it was providing for her future. However, when she spoke to her mother on the phone a week before her murder, Darlene was upset about something that was going on at Fort Carson and wanted to get away from the installation. She told her mother that she could not explain to her why she was so upset at that time. The Krashik family worked hard on their own investigation into Darlene's case and on keeping her story in the public eye. In 1996, they came to Colorado Springs to distribute flyers asking for information in Darlene's voice. I was only 20 years old. They took my dignity, my pride, and my jacket. Then, without mercy, they took my life. If you know something and think it's insignificant, you're mistaken. It's probably the missing link. Betty Lou and Paul Krashik investigated similar crimes from all over the world, filling up their home office with files and newspaper clippings. As the original investigators retired or were reassigned, the couple would call their replacements to make sure that they knew about their daughter and were working on her case. They kept Darlene's picture with them in their Bible. Darlene's case was reopened several times in hopes that new technology would finally identify her killer. In 2004, DNA from an unknown male was identified on several pieces of evidence and on several areas of Darlene's body. Originally, only a partial DNA profile was identified from this evidence, but in 2016, a much stronger profile was isolated. Unfortunately, no match to this profile was found in local or federal databases. That same year, the DNA evidence was submitted to two different laboratories for further testing. It was sent to the United States Army Criminal Investigation Laboratory for YSTR analysis, which focuses specifically on the Y chromosome. The evidence was also sent to Parabon Nanolabs that December. Parabon used their snapshot DNA phenotyping program to create an image of what the contributor of the DNA may have looked like at the time of the murder, and in 2016, based on his DNA. They had no way of knowing the perpetrator's actual age, so they had to assign one. The images were generated to show the unknown male in his mid-20s, as he may have been in 1987, and in his mid-50s, as he may have been at the time the images were created. These images were released to the public in March of 2017, but despite the offer of a $10,000 reward from the Army, no one came forward correctly identifying the man in the images. In early 2019, Army CID and the Colorado Springs Police Department asked Parabon to submit the DNA profile to GEDmatch, an online genetic genealogy database, and try to use genetic genealogy to identify their suspect. Using this method, Parabon was able to identify several distant relatives of the individual who had left his DNA at the scene. The closest relatives were a woman and her daughter living in Wisconsin, and another woman living in Texas. These women were believed to have a 6th to 9th degree relationship to the contributor of the DNA profile being investigated, meaning they could be as closely related as second cousins once removed, or as distantly related as fourth cousins. By constructing the family trees of the relatives found in the GEDmatch database and comparing them, Parabon was able to narrow down what branch of their family they shared with the unknown male. Parabon was then able to identify a potential suspect found in all of their family trees who would have shared the same amount of DNA as the person with the DNA profile from the crime scene. That suspect was 58-year-old Michael David White. White had served in the Army from October of 1979 until April of 1998, working as a signal operations manager. He had been stationed at Fort Carson from September of 1986 until August of 1987. After leaving the Army, White went to work for CenturyLink. He worked there for the next 2 decades, and eventually he rose to the position of senior network engineer. In 2019, he was living in Thornton, Colorado, just north of Denver, with his wife. He had no criminal record. On May 20, 2019, 2 detectives went to White's residence and saw him get into his car. They then followed him to work. Later that day, they followed him as he left work on his lunch break and went to a nearby fast food restaurant. There, they watched him drink from a cup as he ate his meal. When White left the restaurant, leaving the cup behind, the 2 detectives collected it in hopes that a DNA sample could be taken from it. They also surreptitiously swabbed the door handle of White's car as another potential source of his DNA. Testing showed that Michael White's DNA matched that found at the crime scene. On June 13, 2019, 32 years after Darlene Krashok's murder, he was arrested at his home and taken into custody on a no-bond warrant. He is being charged with first-degree murder after deliberation, first-degree felony murder, and aggravated first-degree sexual assault. White's wife told local reporters that her husband is innocent of the charges against him and that their entire family is shocked by his arrest. Darlene's parents traveled to Colorado from their home in West Virginia to attend Michael White's first appearance in court shortly after his arrest. The appearance was only about 5 minutes long, but the trip was still worth it for the Krashoks. They returned to Colorado for a preliminary hearing in the case on October 25, 2019. Paul and Betty Lou have pledged to make the trip to Colorado. Every one of Michael White's court appearances. The Krashoks are hoping that after 32 years of freedom, White will live long enough to serve 32 years in prison. He had his probation. Now it's time to do his time, Paul told Fox 21 News. I would just tell him that I feel sorry for his mother, Betty Lou said in the same interview. He took my life away from me when he took Darlene, so I can only imagine what his mother feels knowing what he did. Michael White is currently being held at the Criminal Justice Center in Colorado Springs, and his next court appearance is scheduled for February 18, 2020. At approximately 4:20 p.m. on November 7, 2015, an ambulance was on its way to a hospital in Hereford, England, when it was flagged down by a trio of people struggling down the road. One of these people was an older man clearly struggling to stand. He was being supported by a younger man and a woman who had happened upon the 2 men near the Hereford bus station. As they struggled to walk towards the hospital and offered to help, The older man was loaded into the ambulance to be taken the rest of the way to the hospital. The paramedics believed that, in addition to his obvious physical frailty, the man was suffering from some sort of dementia. He seemed to be smiling and crying simultaneously and was seemingly unaware of his surroundings. He couldn't answer the basic questions asked of him, although he did eventually provide the first name Roger. The man who had been bringing him to the hospital also did not provide much information about himself. He refused to give his name and contact information because he claimed to be working at a nearby base of the Special Air Service, or SAS, an elite special forces unit of the British Army. He was dressed in what appeared to be some sort of military uniform and spoke with an American accent. He told officials that he had found the elderly man face down in a country lane near Credenhill, a village just outside of town. He left the hospital shortly after arriving there. The older man was still disoriented and could not provide any information about who he was or how he got to the area. He did eventually provide the full name of Roger Curry, but it was unclear if he meant that it was his name or the name of someone he knew. He had no form of identification on him or anything else that could help police determine his identity. He was dressed in all new clothes from a British department store, but police believed he was originally from North America. The man was very soft-spoken and difficult to understand when he was able to speak, but it was originally believed that he was Canadian based on his accent. A linguistics expert was eventually brought in to evaluate his accent, and they believed the man to be from the United States. The West Mercia police initially assumed that the man who may or may not have been named Roger would be identified quickly when his worried family reported him missing. That report never came. Police looked into missing persons reports from all over the UK as well as in Canada and the United States. They checked CCTV footage from the area but found nothing to help their investigation. They took the man's fingerprints and DNA but found no matches in any database. With no one looking for a man who clearly required close supervision, doctors and police began to fear that he had been intentionally abandoned by his family. Authorities then appealed to the public to help identify the man who would eventually become widely known as the Credenhill Man because of the location where he was allegedly found. The story was featured on local television and in newspapers, and eventually his story spread widely through social media. When none of these efforts resulted in an identification, the Hill Man was moved to Hill Court, a local care home that specializes in caring for dementia patients. He lived a peaceful life there and staff adored him. Their only complaint about him was that he would take more than his share of chocolate muffins. In 2016, still with no idea who the Credenhill Man was, authorities decided to launch another media campaign. The story was covered by the BBC and Sky News, reaching more people and garnering much more interest from the public. After seeing the story on the news, Rebecca Reese, the woman who had helped get the man to the hospital, came forward. Police briefly investigated her, thinking perhaps the Hill Man might have been Rebecca's husband, but she was soon clear of suspicion. The case of the Hill Man became a popular mystery online with amateur sleuths from all around the world discussing it through media. One such sleuth posted on the BBC West Midlands Facebook page with an image from a 1958 high school yearbook. The yearbook was from Edmonds High School just outside of Seattle, Washington. In the image was an 18-year-old Earl Roger Curry, who looked similar to the Credenhill Man. It would be approximately the same age as he was believed to be. A reporter named Dara McIntyre was working on a documentary about missing people when he happened upon the case of the Hill Man and had the chance to meet him. He decided to travel to Washington State to follow up on the lead that had been posted on Facebook and would ultimately confirm the identity of the Hill Man. After graduating high school, Earl Roger Curry, who went by his middle name, served in the United States Air Force. He married a woman named Mary Jo and the couple had 2 children. After leaving the Air Force, he worked as a nurse for Kaiser Permanente. He and his family lived in Whittier, California, a suburb of Los Angeles. Dara McIntyre traveled to Whittier and was able to speak to some of Roger Curry's neighbors. When they were shown pictures of the Hill Man, they confirmed that he was their former neighbor. Roger and Mary Jo no longer lived in the home because it had been badly damaged by a fire in 2014 and deemed uninhabitable by the city. However, in August of 2015, a neighbor had seen then 75-year-old Roger wandering around behind the chain-link fence that had been constructed around his property. There was a padlock securing the entrance to the fence, so the neighbor climbed over the fence to check on Roger. Roger's wife Mary Jo was also on the property, sleeping on an air mattress on the porch of the burnt-out home. The temperature that day was almost 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The couple did have a cooler with water and some food, but they were hardly strong enough to be living outdoors in such heat. Mary Jo had Parkinson's disease, Roger had Alzheimer's disease, and could not care for himself. When police arrived on the scene, he was confused and dehydrated. Police would eventually discover that the food and the cooler was being brought to the Kais by their son Kevin. The key to the padlock on the fence was found on his keychain, which would seem to imply that he had been the one who had locked his parents behind the fence, preventing them from leaving. However, Mary Jo told the police that it had been her idea for her and her husband to live behind what was left of their home, and no charges were ever filed against Kevin in relation to the matter. Kevin Curry had been charged with a number of criminal offenses ranging from assault to fraud to burglary in his past and had spent time in prison. He had been caring for his parents in 2015, but they had previously been estranged. In 2000, Roger Curry was granted a restraining order against his son after Kevin tried to strangle him, pushed him against a wall, and made several threats against him. According to neighbors, he still did not treat his parents well after he came back into their lives, as they could routinely hear him yelling and making loud noises in his parents' home. The circumstances of how Roger Curry arrived in the United Kingdom did not begin becoming clear to the police until March of 2016, when they finally heard from the mystery man who had been trying to walk Roger to the hospital in Hereford. 50-year-old Simon Hayes called in to identify himself and provided an account very similar to the one he had given to the paramedics who brought Roger to the hospital in 2015. Simon claimed that he had been a member of the Special Boat Service of the Royal Navy attending a course at the SAS base at Hereford when he and a Canadian Army serviceman found Roger face down in a country road. He told authorities that he was now living in Los Angeles, but was currently in the UK visiting family. After Simon provided a formal statement, authorities followed up on his account and went to speak with his father Ken in April of 2016. Ken informed them that his son was not visiting. He was living with him. He had previously lived in Los Angeles but had been deported back to the UK in 2013. He also told them that Simon knew both Kevin and Roger Curry. Simon Hayes had moved to Los Angeles in 2003 to begin an American branch of his motorsport coaching business. He met Kevin Curry through a mutual friend, and the two men bonded over a shared interest in Area 51. They became close friends, and Simon spent the holidays with the Currys in 2010, seeing firsthand the effects Alzheimer's was already having on Kevin's father Roger. Simon was deported in January of 2013 following an arrest for drunk driving. According to Simon, he was deported because his cellmate started a fight with him and he was blamed for it. According to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, he was deported because he had been in the country for 6 years on a 90-day visa waiver program. Upon his return to the United Kingdom, Simon immediately began applying for a visa to return to the United States. He supported his applications with a fraudulent reference. He claimed to be from a British major general that detailed a glorious military career that he did not ever have. All of his applications were denied. Simon and Kevin did remain in contact after Simon left the United States. Confronted by authorities with the fact that he knew the Curry family, Simon changed his story. He now admitted that his friend Kevin had called him to tell him that his family was about to take a European vacation and that he wanted to stop in the UK to see him prior to his trip. Kevin said that he would be putting his parents in a nursing home for the time he would be out of the country. Simon claims that he was therefore surprised to see Mary Jo and Roger, who was so weak that he had to be brought out in a wheelchair when he met the family at Gatwick Airport. Simon denied that there was ever any plan to abandon Roger. Instead, Kevin asked Simon to help him get his father admitted to a hospital because he was sick. Simon agreed, and Kevin rented a car for him to use for the task. Prior to their departure, Kevin had borrowed Simon's credit card to do some shopping, which may have been when he purchased the new British clothes Roger was found wearing. Simon and Roger then drove 150 miles to Hereford, where Simon put on a fake uniform and American accent. There are several details about Simon's story and the actual events that call his claims of innocence into question. There were 2 hospitals within 6 miles of the hotel where the Kais were staying. Instead of simply bringing Roger to one of these hospitals, Simon drove 150 miles, presumably passing more hospitals along the way, to bring him to the hospital in Hereford. This decision does not make it appear as though his main motivation was Roger's health. Nor does the fact that he made the frail older man who could barely stand try to walk to the hospital from the bus station. Simon was provided with a vehicle and did drive to the area, but for some reason would not drive all the way to the hospital to drop off Roger, instead trying to get him to attempt to make the last part of the unnecessarily long trip on foot. Simon also lied both about who he was and how he came to be with Roger in Hereford. While the fake persona of an American soldier and the made-up story about training at the SAS base were most likely some sort of fantasy of Simon's, his dishonesty with the hospital staff and later the police kept them from identifying Roger for months when he could have provided them with that information from the start. In a 2019 interview, Simon would explain his deception by essentially admitting that the plan was to abandon Roger but just temporarily. He says that he did not want anyone to be able to identify Roger because he wanted the rest of the Curry family to have a break from caring for him for at least a week. If the hospital could not identify Roger, they could not locate his family and they could enjoy their vacation while Roger was being cared for at the hospital. After leaving Roger in Hereford, Simon met back up with the rest of the Curry family and accompanied them on the next leg of their trip in Denmark. Kevin Curry has not spoken publicly very much about the case, but he has said that he did not abandon his father in a foreign country to place the burden and cost of his care on the British government as it appears. He claims that he did not abandon his father. He just asked a friend to take him to the hospital because he became ill after arriving in the UK. There are several glaring problems with this account, however. When Kevin purchased the airline tickets for the family trip, he bought round-trip tickets for everyone in the family except for Roger, indicating that he knew in advance that Roger would not be returning to the US with them. The most obvious reason Kevin looked suspicious is that he never returned to the UK to get his father out of the hospital before returning home, never reported him missing, and never showed any interest in finding him after he sent him off with Simon. Even if he did not plan to abandon his father, it could be argued that this lack of action amounts to abandonment. Kevin also lied to his extended family about where Roger was during the time he spent in the UK. According to Kevin's uncle, Tim Autorez, Kevin claimed that Roger was in a nursing home in Arizona and doing very well there. Police in England had researched people with the name of Roger Curry and families with that surname as a part of their investigation and had been given Kevin Curry's contact information by authorities in the United States. In March of 2016, when they called his phone number, the person who answered denied knowing a Roger Curry. There is of course the possibility that the police had the wrong number or someone else answered Kevin's phone. However, shortly after police made this call, Kevin Curry made a call to Simon Hayes. Simon would later say that during this conversation, Kevin asked him not to come forward with his story about what had happened with his father because it would upset his mother. He also told him that Roger would become homeless if he was returned to the United States. There are, of course, enormous financial and emotional burdens placed on family members who are taking care of elderly dementia patients. However, thousands of families cope with these stresses without dumping their relative in a foreign country so that they can receive free care. Furthermore, all of the financial resources available to Roger do not appear to have been used for his benefit. Roger had Social Security benefits, a pension, and veterans benefits that provided him with a modest monthly income of $1,500. It is unclear what happened to these payments during the 8 months Roger was in the UK. Since he was never reported missing, the issuing agencies would not have had a reason to stop making payments. While Roger and Mary Jo's house was essentially destroyed in the 2014 fire, he still owned the property in an upper-middle-class neighborhood in a county famous for its expensive real estate. However, the property was not sold to help finance the care Roger and Mary Jo both needed. The Kais may have had limited resources, but they still had some that could have been utilized. In 2019, Simon Hayes was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for his role in Roger's case. His lies, according to Simon Davis, the barrister who prosecuted him, resulted in an enormous waste of effort by the police and the fraudulent use of public funds. Roger's care during his time in the UK cost the National Health Service approximately £20,000. The defendant was part of a plan to bring Roger from the US and dump him in Hereford, abandoning him so he could receive care from local health care providers. It was clearly planned, Davis told the court. Court documents in both California and the UK alleged that Kevin Curry was under investigation for fraud and elder abuse. But neither the Los Angeles Police Department nor the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office opened a formal investigation into the case, and no charges have ever been filed against Kevin Curry. While he had the most to gain from the alleged plot, only his accomplice is facing legal consequences from it. Following his identification, Roger Curry was repatriated to the United States in July of 2016. Upon his arrival, Los Angeles County officials filed an application to have a conservator appointed to handle Roger's care and affairs. No one in his family is prepared to accept responsibility for him. The application claimed his own wife and son abused him when they took him overseas only to abandon him there. Kevin and Mary Jo Curry did appear at some of the hearings relating to the conservatorship but never formally contested it. Roger was ultimately placed under the care of a conservator who arranged for his benefits to be used to get him treatment in a residential facility. Roger spent time in a few nursing homes before settling into one in Long Beach, California. Upon his arrival, he was still able to at least somewhat participate in activities like bingo and seemed happy. However, by 2019, his health had deteriorated to the point where he was almost completely bedridden. According to reports filed by his conservator, his caretakers said that he was still soft-spoken and respectful even in his weakened state. Unfortunately, the solving of the Credenhill Man case did not result in a happy ending. Roger Curry's identification did not result in a happy reunion with his family. Neither Kevin nor Mary Jo Curry has seen or visited Roger since his return to the United States. Mandy Stavik was highly accomplished and never limited herself to mastering just one thing. The honors student at Mount Baker High School played both varsity basketball and varsity softball, and also ran track. She was fluent in sign language and could speak Japanese. She played 3 instruments, clarinet, flute, and saxophone in the school band. She was brave, independent, and driven. After graduating high school in 1989, 18-year-old Mandy went on to Central Washington University. Her initial career goal was to become a commercial pilot, but she was beginning to rethink her plans by the middle of her first semester of college. That November, she returned to her family home in Clipper, Washington, just outside the small town of Acme for her Thanksgiving break. The day after Thanksgiving, November 24, 1989, Mandy decided to go for a run and left the house around 2:30 in the afternoon. Normally, her mother, Mary, would ride her bike alongside Mandy while she ran. But on that day, Mary decided to stay home because her sister was visiting. Mandy was accompanied on a run by just the family dog, a German shepherd named Kyra. At home, Mandy's route for her daily runs took her down the street her family's house was on, Strand Road. She would run down to where the road dead-ended at the Nooksack River, and then turn around to run home. Mandy's brother, Lee, had been visiting a friend that afternoon at a house on Strand Road between Highway 9 and the Stavik home. While he was there, he saw his sister running by on her way back to their house. She had less than half a mile to go before she would reach it. But Mandy never arrived home. 2 hours later, Kyra arrived back at the house without Mandy and visibly upset. Mary Stavik's first instinct was to call Mandy's boyfriend, Rick Zender, to see if he knew where she was. He did not. She then called the sheriff and everyone she knew in the area to begin the search for Mandy. Almost every member of the small rural community eventually helped look for Mandy. People searched on foot, on horseback, and on all-terrain vehicles. A local tracker tried to work with Kyra, the German shepherd, hoping that she would lead them back to Mandy. However, Kyra would cower in fear upon stepping off of the porch of the family home. Kyra was an older dog, but still very protective of her family. She may have been kicked or hit when she tried to defend Mandy against an assailant, resulting in the change in her behavior when she arrived home. On November 26th, a search team covering small side roads discovered a pair of green sweatpants. Mandy had been wearing teal sweatpants and a light-colored sweatshirt when she left for her run. Mary Stavik did not believe that the sweatpants the search team found belonged to her daughter, but they were still submitted to the crime lab for analysis. Lab tests would eventually show that the pants were unrelated to the case. The following day, November 27, 1989, Mandy was finally found, but the discovery did not bring her family peace. A local fire department had been searching the Nooksack River with one of their boats. They located Mandy's body in the South Fork of the river, caught up in some debris 6 miles away from her home. She was wearing only her socks and shoes. Her clothing and the Walkman she had been using on her run have never been found. An autopsy would later determine that Mandy had been raped and that she had died from asphyxia by drowning. There were no signs of a struggle on the riverbank near where she was found, and the water was very shallow in that stretch of the river. Mandy was also a very strong swimmer who had worked as a lifeguard. These factors led investigators to believe that Mandy had not been conscious when she went into the water. This was further supported by a wound on the top of her head that the medical examiner believed would have rendered her unconscious. Mandy also had numerous scratches and lacerations on her legs, as though she had run through dense brush or the thorny blackberry bushes that were common in the area while not wearing pants. Unfortunately, Mandy was not the first of her siblings to be murdered. In 1975, her oldest brother Brent had been killed on property owned by the Fort Richardson Army Base just outside of Anchorage, where he was authorized to go hunting. He had been shot 17 times. His killer has still never been found. Mandy, her mother, and her 2 remaining siblings then moved to Washington State from Alaska, while Mandy was still very young, following her parents' divorce. More than 1,000 people attended Mandy's memorial service. There was not a church in the area large enough to hold that many people, so the service was held at the high school Mandy had graduated from just a few months before. The obvious first suspect in the case was Mandy's boyfriend, Rick. The couple had been dating for 3.5 years, but the relationship was on and off for some of that time. However, Rick was eager to cooperate with police, who described him as being extremely forthcoming when he gave his statement to them. He was eventually cleared of any involvement in the case. In 1989, DNA testing was still a relatively new technique, especially in the criminal justice field. Luckily for the Stavik family, Ron Peterson of the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office had just returned from a training at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, about how DNA could be used by law enforcement. Most state and local crime labs were not equipped to identify and sequence DNA evidence, but the FBI's lab was. Samples from Mandy's body were sent to the FBI lab, and they were able to isolate Mandy's DNA sequence and that of an unknown male. Investigators followed up on more than 7,000 leads, and tried to connect Mandy's case to other crimes all over the Northwest, but the case still went cold. In 2009, Detective Kevin Bowie inherited the case, becoming the 3rd person to lead the investigation. His strategy for trying to solve the now 20-year-old case, inspired by a famous case in England, was simple. Identify all of the men living in the area at the time of the murder and test all of their DNA until they found a match. Because Mandy had lived in a rural area with a small population, this theoretically could be done. In practice, however, it was obviously much more difficult to do. Over the next 4 years, the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office was able to test dozens of DNA samples, but none of them were a match to the DNA from the crime scene. However, around this time, they were also able to identify a potential new suspect who had never spoken to the police about the case, Timothy Bass. Timothy Bass had lived a few doors down from the Staviks in 1989. People who knew him then have said that he was very quiet and kept to himself. He had moved away shortly after Mandy's murder and had gotten married just 2 months after her death. By 2013, he and his wife had 3 children and were living in Everson, Washington. Investigators traveled to Everson to speak with Timothy about the case. He claimed to not remember it or Mandy's name. This made the investigators immediately suspicious of him. Mandy's murder had been major news in her small and previously very safe town. Mandy had also gone to the same high school as Timothy and had been friends with his younger brother Tom. A witness would later reveal that Timothy had also started attending basketball games at the high school when Mandy was on the team to watch her play. Mandy also ran past his house almost every single day when she was not at college. Timothy refused to provide a voluntary DNA sample. Police, however, still wanted to compare Timothy Bass's DNA to the DNA from the crime scene, so they went to his employer to ask for help. Timothy worked as a local delivery driver for the France bakery outlet. Investigators met with Kim Wagner, who managed the outlet. They told her that they were investigating an employee and wanted access to information about their delivery routes so that they could follow the employee and potentially collect a cigarette butt or some other discarded item with DNA on it. Kim felt as though she was not in a position to comply with this request and asked the investigators to consult with human resources at their corporate office. The corporate office in turn asked for a subpoena or search warrant to share that information. Authorities asked Tim Bass for a voluntary sample again in 2015, and again he refused. A few years after her conversation with the police, an offhand remark would change Kim Wagner's mind about getting involved in the case. She and her husband were out at a bar, talking with a friend about her coworkers. The friend happened to be an acquaintance of Timothy Bass, and the group began discussing his eccentricities. The friend mentioned to Kim that Timothy had lived on the same street as Mandy Stavik when she was killed. Kim then realized that Timothy and the Mandy Stavik case must have been the reason investigators had come to speak with her in 2013. When authorities returned to try to get information from the bakery outlet again in 2017, Kim confronted them with her suspicions about what they were investigating. She also told them Timothy Bass's assigned delivery route. This information did not immediately help the authorities get Timothy's DNA. He wore gloves, so his DNA was not left on any of the bread he delivered, and he did not smoke, so he never discarded cigarette butts. He took his trash home instead of leaving it in his delivery truck, and he was the bakery's only employee who did not turn in his uniform to be laundered by the company. His conversations with police seemed to have concerned him enough that he carefully guarded any source of DNA that could be covertly collected. Kim Wagner offered to collect a discarded DNA sample from Timothy inside the bakery building. However, police told her that this would not be possible. It would be illegal for them to ask a civilian to collect evidence on their behalf. However, on August 10, 2017, Kim Wagner watched as Timothy Bass drank out of a plastic cup and discarded it in a trash can, along with a can of Coke. After he walked away, Kim decided to collect the items out of the trash can and hide them in a bag in her desk. She then turned the items over to the police. Kim was so motivated to help in the case because she, like the rest of the community, had been horrified by Mandy's murder. Kim was just 19 at the time of the murder, just 1 year older than Mandy. By 2017, Kim also had another reason for wanting the case to be closed. She had a daughter of her own and was haunted by the idea of Mary Stavik never finding out who had taken her daughter from her. The evidence Kim provided was submitted to the crime lab for DNA testing. These tests showed that the DNA Timothy Bass left on the cup when he drank from it matched the DNA found inside of Mandy. Timothy Bass was arrested on December 12, 2017. On Mary Stavik's 81st birthday, Whatcom County Sheriff Bill Elfo knocked on her door and told her that an arrest had finally been made in her daughter's case. Following his arrest, Timothy Bass originally stuck to the story he had been giving to police since 2013. He did not know Mandy, and he had never so much as kissed her. However, once it became clear to him that police had somehow gotten his DNA, he changed his story. He now claimed that he had a consensual sexual relationship with Mandy, which is why his DNA was on her body. Timothy claimed that he had met Mandy before she left for college while he and his father were out mountain biking. His father had since passed away and could not confirm the story. Timothy says that he and Mandy began spending time together just talking and eventually began casually having sex. They had sex again when Mandy was home for Thanksgiving. Timothy could not, however, provide any basic information about Mandy, and not one witness was ever found who had seen the two of them together. There were no phone calls or letters between Mandy and Timothy after she left for college. Police did not believe Timothy's new story. Leading up to his trial, Timothy's defense lawyers tried to get all DNA evidence excluded. They argued that police had first obtained their client's DNA illegally because they asked a civilian to gather it for them. Police can legally collect items that someone has thrown away, but they cannot enlist civilians to do it for them. The lawyers argued that because Kim had previously met with authorities, she was acting on their behalf when she collected the cup and the can from the garbage. Kim Wagner appeared at a hearing and testified that collecting the items had been her own idea and that she had done it of her own accord. It is legal for civilians to turn over potential evidence that they legally obtained to authorities. A judge ruled in August of 2018 that Kim had not been acting on behalf of law enforcement when she collected and turned over the items, and the DNA evidence remained admissible. When Timothy went on trial for first-degree murder in May of 2019, his defense was based on his claim that he had a consensual relationship with Mandy. The presence of his DNA inside of her body, his lawyers argued, therefore meant nothing. Timothy had no proof of this relationship, however, and as the trial progressed, it became more and more evident that his word did not carry a lot of value. Timothy's soon-to-be ex-wife, who had been his girlfriend at the time of Mandy's murder, testified that her husband, against whom she had previously applied for an order of protection, had threatened her into providing him with a false alibi for the day of the murder. It was also revealed that when Timothy's family came to visit him in jail after his arrest, he had slipped them a note in which he asked his mother to lie to the police, telling them that he had been Christmas shopping with her the day of the murder. He also tried to convince his mother to blame the crime on his dead father. She would not let him. The most troubling testimony of all, however, came from Timothy's own brother, Tom. Tom Bass testified that in 2015, after authorities asked Timothy to volunteer a DNA sample for the second time, Timothy had asked him to lie to the police for him. Timothy told his younger brother that he had sex with Mandy the weekend of Thanksgiving. He wanted him to go to the police and say that he also had sex with Mandy. Timothy wanted to make it appear as though Mandy was, in his terms, a loose girl, so that the police would believe his story about him having consensual casual sex with her. Tom, who had been friends with Mandy, refused to go along with the plan. On May 24, 2019, almost 30 years after Mandy's murder, a jury found Timothy Bass guilty of first-degree murder after less than a day of deliberation. Mary Stavik and the rest of Mandy's family was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. On July 2nd, a judge imposed the maximum sentence of 320 months, or almost 27 years, in prison. Timothy is planning to appeal his conviction. Every year since 1990, a scholarship has been awarded in Mandy's name to a Mount Baker High School student active in the school's music program. The funding for the scholarship includes the $25,000 the community raised to offer as a reward for information that led to the arrest of Mandy's killer. That money was donated to the scholarship fund after years had gone by with no arrest in the case. Even without the incentive of a reward, Mandy's case was finally solved thanks to the impact her life and death had on her community and the persistence of Mandy's family and the investigators. Sidney Sid Wells was born in Norton, Kansas in 1961, the third of his parents' three sons. His family moved around due to his father's career with the Navy, but Sid always had a lot of friends wherever they lived. He was an active, happy, and popular child. Sid graduated from high school in 1979, while his family was living in Longmont, Colorado, and he enrolled at the University of Colorado Boulder to study journalism. Sid had great respect for his father's service in the Navy and therefore enrolled in the Navy's Reserve Officer Training Corps during his freshman year. The Navy ROC held a dance every spring. So, in March of 1980, Sid needed a date for it. He asked a girl who lived in his dorm to go with him, and she accepted the invitation. Sid had a crush on her, but only knew that her name was Shauna and that he loved the way her hair fell across her face. Sid did not know at the time that she was Shauna Redford, the daughter of actor and director Robert Redford. The date at the dance turned into a relationship that lasted through Sid and Shauna's sophomore and junior years of college. Sid and Shauna were inseparable. Sid was welcomed by Shauna's family, and he was regularly invited on family trips. Shauna's father even flew Sid to New York so that he could meet with broadcaster Tom Brokaw. After their meeting, Mr. Brokaw decided to offer Sid an internship. Sid never got the chance to realize his professional goals. However, he was planning on spending his senior year completing his degree and interning at a local news station in addition to his part-time job at a restaurant. He hoped to fly jets for the Navy after he graduated. He was living in a condo with his older brother Sam and another roommate, Saints Micah. The three of them had lived together since the beginning of the year. Sam decided to spend a night away camping shortly before Sid was due to start classes for the fall semester. Sam returned from the camping trip on August 1st, 1983. When he entered the condo shortly after noon, he discovered the body of his brother Sid lying face down on the floor. He had been shot at close range in the back of the head. He was just 22 years old and days away from starting his senior year of college. Sam immediately called the police. When they canvassed the building, neighbors told them that they had heard a loud noise, potentially the fatal gunshot, less than an hour before the police arrived. Sid's time of death was estimated to be 11:35 a.m. Sid's girlfriend, Shauna, had seen him shortly before he was killed and was completely devastated by his death. Her father suspended production of his film, The Natural, in Buffalo so that he could travel to Colorado to comfort his daughter, and so that he and the rest of his family could attend Sid's funeral. Since police had not identified a motive for the murder, he also paid for security for the rest of the Wells family in case they were also potential targets of the killer. Shauna was ultimately too upset to return to the university where she had met Sid and dropped out. Very quickly, investigators uncovered concerning information about someone close to Sid. Sam and Sid's roommate Micah had left Boulder on the day of the murder. Police found a note he left at the condo saying that he was going to visit his family for a few days. Police traveled to his mother's home to notify him of his roommate's death. They told them a story about a drug dealer who had been stealing from Sid, which they initially believed. So they placed in protective custody. However, police soon realized that the story was made up. They also noticed problems with other details had shared with them. He had told them that he had gone back to his hometown to get a perm and do some laundry. However, he had just recently gotten a perm and would not need another one until October, according to his hairstylist. Also, there were laundry facilities in his condo building that he did use. Investigators also quickly learned that thing was causing problems for Sid and Sam. When the brothers placed an ad in the newspaper looking for a roommate in January of 1983, they had been hoping that they would find an upperclassman or a graduate student from the university to live with them. Different reports state that 24-year-old thing had either graduated from or dropped out of the university. Sid and Sam had decided that he would still be a good roommate because he was from a small town near the one where some of the Wells family lived. The brothers quickly learned that they were wrong. Sid described Thane as weird and antisocial to his mother soon after they moved in. Later statements from Thane's own friends said that Thane had financial problems, a drug habit, and a love for scams and theft. Sam and Sid had trouble collecting Thane's share of the rent. The day Sid was murdered, August 1st, rent was due, and Nee was supposed to repay additional money he owed Sid. Thane had told police that his father had once given him a shotgun, but that he no longer had it and had not seen it in 7 years. However, when police searched the room he stayed in at his mother's house 2 days after the murder, they found a Montgomery Ward brand 20-gauge shotgun. Sid had been killed with a 20-gauge shotgun. According to Smika's sister, the gun had not been there when the room had recently been cleaned. Another resident of the condominium complex told police that they had seen carrying a 28 inches tall trash can from the parking lot into the building around 6:30 a.m. on the day Sid was killed. He was carrying it with both hands as if it were very heavy. She had been surprised to see this because Thane and his roommates were known to be rather messy. Bain in particular was not known for being very clean. According to Sam Wells, Bain had never taken out the trash in the entire time he had lived in the condo. Furthermore, police examined the trash can when they processed the scene, and it still had trash in it. The rifle found in Thane's room could be broken down into pieces short enough that they would easily fit inside the trash can. Then Micah was arrested for Sid's murder on October 6, 1983. The case went to a grand jury on October 24th, but by the end of the month, District Attorney Alex Hunter opted not to file charges against Smika because he did not believe there was enough evidence to convict him. SMA was released from custody, which horrified Sid's loved ones. Smika lived in Denver for a time and then moved to California. In 1986, his car was found abandoned and wiped clean of fingerprints in Beverly Hills. He has not been seen since. In an interview with police in 1997, SMA's parents admitted that he had told them of his plan to change his name and disappear before he left. They implied that they knew what his new name was, but refused to divulge it. They said he told them to get their passports because he would be leaving the country and they would need them to come visit him once he got settled. However, they maintain that he never contacted them again and that they do not know where he is living. Smika's parents were interviewed in 1997 because Sid's case was formally reopened that year. The case again received renewed attention in 2008 after Stan Garnett was elected as district attorney in Boulder after promising to focus on solving cold cases. The Boulder police began working with the FBI to examine all of the evidence in Sid's case, which was still preserved. Ultimately, the effort found new forensic and ballistic evidence that connected Smika to the murder of Sid Wells. On December 2, 2010, a district judge in Boulder signed an arrest warrant for Thane Smika on a charge of first-degree murder. According to the arrest warrant issued for Smika, in addition to the forensic evidence, witness testimony also supported him being charged. One witness claimed that Smika confessed to the murder after a night of heavy drinking. Another told police in 1997 that Smika's sister had talked about having to wash his clothes, which were covered in blood, on the day of the murder. After the first arrest warrant was issued, Smika was charged federally with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. A federal arrest warrant was issued by the United States District Court in Colorado on December 13, 2010. Of course, for Smika to be arrested, he must first be found. As of 2025, he remains on the loose. The 1980s brought one devastating loss after another for Sid's mother, June. Her father died in 1980. Her husband, Sid's father, Richard, died in 1981. Her mother died in 1982 and her son Sid was killed in 1983. June Wells eventually remarried and became June Menor. She found support through the Families of Homicide Victims and Missing Persons organization and became heavily involved with them. She spent years advocating for the victims of crimes and their families. She completed a term as a family member on the first board of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Task Force. As much as her work helped her, nothing could fully heal the pain caused by Sid's death. In a 2012 interview, she said, "I've moved beyond the grieving stage, but the pain is always there. Most of all, I miss Sid's presence, just having him around. I've never given up. How can I? I need justice for Sid." June would fight for her son until her dying day. In 2014, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Even in the final weeks of her life, she was giving interviews in hopes of bringing attention to her son's case, and in turn hopefully finding witnesses who could help lead police to SMA so that he could finally be arrested. In August of 2014, she said, "I don't know that I'll live long enough to see a resolution in this case, but I would hope that I can, and I've never given up hope." Unfortunately, June never got to see her son's alleged killer captured. She passed away on September 20, 2014 at the age of 75. Sid's girlfriend at the time of his death, Shauna Redford, was very special to June. When June was too distraught to get out of bed following Sid's murder, Shauna climbed into the bed and cried with her. Shauna went on to become a painter. She married journalist Eric Schloer and had 2 children. She and June remained close, and June considered Shauna to be her daughter-in-law. Shauna and her famous father brought a lot of national attention to Sid's case, which June had some mixed feelings about. In a 2012 interview, she stated that at first she feared Sid's case was being overshadowed by the Redford connection. However, she said, "I finally realized that I need the Redford connection to keep the case open." Sid's case remained important to both Shauna and her father. In 2010, after the arrest warrant for Smika was issued, Robert Redford called Boulder District Attorney Stan Garnett to thank him, his office, and the Boulder Police Department for their ongoing work on the case. According to Mr. Garnett, it sounded as though the actor was still interested in the case, not only because of the effect it had on his daughter, but because he genuinely cared for Sid. Robert Redford passed away on September 16, 2025 at the age of 89. Sid's brother, Robert, expressed his deep appreciation for everything he had done for the Wells family over the years. His death also brought renewed attention to the memory of Sid Wells and the effort to locate and arrest Thane Smika for his murder. The day after Robert Redford's death on September 17, 2025, The FBI field office in Denver shared a wanted poster for Thane Smyka and highlighted the reward of up to $10,000 being offered for information that leads to his arrest and conviction. Hunting season had not yet begun in Buncombe County, North Carolina on September 7, 1997. Nevertheless, that day, a father and son went out to hunt deer in Pisgah National Forest near Asheville. The trip would soon bring them into contact with law enforcement, but not because they had violated local regulations. Instead, they were about to open a new chapter of a months-long mystery near the Stony Point picnic area. Around 4:00 p.m., they discovered a partially buried human skeleton. The Buncombe County Sheriff's Office came to the scene to investigate. Some of the bones had been scattered around a 100-yard area by scavenging animals. The majority of the skeleton was, however, still contained in the Long John-style insulated underwear the person had been wearing at the time of their death, along with blue jeans and hiking boots. Nearby, investigators found a blue vinyl backpack full of winter clothes and a shirt that had been buried in the ground. While there was cash in the backpack and in the pocket of the shirt, there were no credit cards or pieces of identification to help the sheriff's office determine whose bones had been discovered in their jurisdiction. The remains were sent to the North Carolina Medical Examiner's office in Chapel Hill. There, the medical examiner ruled that the skeleton belonged to a homicide victim. This determination was based in part in the circumstances in which the remains had been found. They had been wrapped in a blanket and then buried, something the deceased person could not have done to themselves after their death. Furthermore, slashes and punctures in the bra found with the remains indicated that the victim had been stabbed to death. In terms of identifying the victim, the medical examiner determined that she was a white woman, most likely between the ages of 40 and 55. She had severe arthritis in her right knee. She had undergone extensive and expensive dental work which could be used to identify her, but they would need dental records to match the work to in order to do so. Luckily for investigators, a man named Dr. Parker Davis saw an article about their Jane Doe that had been published on September 9th in the Asheville Citizen-Times. Dr. Davis worked as an emergency room doctor at Angel Medical Center in Franklin, North Carolina, approximately 65 miles west of Asheville. His hospital had previously received a flyer about a missing woman. Dr. Davis believed that the remains discussed in the article could potentially be those of the missing woman. He therefore faxed the newspaper article to the investigating agency on September 25th. They followed up on the lead, and eventually dental records confirmed that the remains were those of 50-year-old Judy Smith. While the identification solved the mystery of whose remains had been found in Pisgah National Forest, it added an entirely new level of confusion to Judy's disappearance. While her family now had some answers about what had happened to her, they had so many more mysterious questions now. Most importantly, how had Judy ended up in North Carolina? She had disappeared more than 600 miles away in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The story of Judy's disappearance began even farther away in Boston, Massachusetts. Judy lived there with her husband, Jeff Smith. Judy and Jeff had both been married before. Their marriage was Judy's third and Jeff's second. Jeff had a daughter, and Judy had both a son and a daughter from her second marriage. Judy worked as a home healthcare nurse, and she had met Jeff through her work. Back when she was still using her second husband's surname and was known as Judy Bradford, Judy had been hired to care for Jeff's father after he returned home from the hospital after having a cancerous growth removed from his throat. Jeff immediately appreciated Judy's bright personality and practical nature. On one of the first occasions he met her at his father's house, he watched in admiration as Judy climbed up on a chair to hang an 4-bag from a curtain rod when faced with the lack of an 4-pole. Jeff also worked in healthcare, but as an attorney. In the spring of 1997, he was due to attend the annual meeting of the Northeast Pharmaceutical Conference, a pharmaceutical organization made up of executives and researchers throughout the Northeast that he represented. The event was being held over the course of several days at the DoubleTree Hotel at Broad and Locust Streets in Philadelphia. Judy had never been to Philadelphia before and wanted to see some of the sights, so she and Jeff decided to make the trip together. They then planned to visit friends in New Jersey. After Jeff's work at the conference was complete on April 9, 1997, the couple went to Logan International Airport to board a flight to Philadelphia together. Things started to go wrong with the trip almost immediately. Judy did not have her driver's license and would not be allowed to board the plane without photo ID. Jeff had a meeting at the conference that afternoon, so he and Judy decided that he would leave on the 3:30 flight as scheduled, while Judy returned home to get her driver's license. She planned to return to the airport to hopefully get a seat on a later flight and meet Jeff at their hotel in Philadelphia after his meeting. Judy was able to catch the 7:30 flight and arrived at the DoubleTree around 10 o'clock p.m. She got a room key from the front desk and met up with Jeff in the lobby. She arrived with a bouquet of flowers and an apology for her forgetfulness for him. Before they went to bed that night, Judy told Jeff about her sightseeing plans for the following day while he was at conference functions. He would be busy with obligations all day, but he made plans with Judy to meet her at their hotel room by 5:30 p.m. so that they could attend a 6 o'clock cocktail party together. The following morning, April 10th, Jeff woke up before his wife. He went downstairs to eat the hotel's complimentary breakfast. He came back to the room to see Judy around 9 a.m. and found her in the shower. After he told her about the breakfast offerings, she joked that she should run down just as she was, naked and dripping wet from the shower. Jeff confirmed their plans for the evening and then left for the day's opening session. Jeff moderated the final panel of the day and then returned to his hotel room to meet up with Judy before the cocktail party. He arrived at 5:30 and was surprised to find that Judy was not there. Judy was very punctual and always arrived places early because to her getting somewhere right on time was actually running late. When 6 o'clock arrived, he considered the possibility that there had been a misunderstanding, and Judy thought they were meeting at the cocktail party. Jeff went down to the room where the party was being held, but did not find his wife there. At 6:15, he asked a hotel concierge for help, and they began calling local hospitals. Jeff spent the next 45 minutes going between the party and his hotel room, hoping that Judy would eventually show up at one of the two locations. She never did. It was not inconceivable to Jeff that Judy could be delayed because Judy was always willing to use her nursing skills to help those in need. The previous year, while on a flight to Florida, she had volunteered to give emergency assistance to a fellow passenger who had AIDS and had become seriously ill. However, it was inconceivable that she had not called the hotel to let him know that she was delayed. Judy had told Jeff that she would be spending the day using the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority's Slashdown Loop, a bus service designed to transport tourists between the major points of interest in downtown Philadelphia, like the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall. Jeff got in a cab and told the driver to drive along the route the flash bus drove, going as slowly as possible so that he could look out the window for his wife, much to the annoyance of the cab driver. He saw no sign of Judy. Jeff spent the rest of the night stopping at his hotel to see if Judy had come back and then going out to new places to look for her. He visited the stations of both the 6th and 9th police districts as well as Jefferson Hospital. He had planned to visit every hospital on a list given to him by a police officer, but a nurse at Jefferson offered to call all of them for him to see if Judy had been admitted as a patient since the concierge had last called or if she had arrived with someone she had given aid to. Jeff called his daughter and his stepchildren to see if Judy had called them, but they had not heard from her. Jeff returned to the 9th District Police Station at midnight, thinking he could now formally report his wife missing. He was incorrect. The officer at the station told him it was too early to file a missing persons report. At best, they could potentially take the report after 9 a.m., 24 hours after Jeff had last seen Judy, although trying to do so would still be pushing his luck. At this point, Jeff was very frustrated with the lack of interest the police showed in trying to help him find Judy. So, he decided to take advantage of some of the connections he had through his work for the Northeast Pharmaceutical Conference. Both Philadelphia Mayor Ed Randell and Representative John Zell, the Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, were speaking at the conference. Jeff reached out to an official from the conference to see if they could ask for help from the politicians. What exactly happened behind the scenes is unclear, but Jeff was soon invited to file a missing persons report by the Philadelphia police. According to Jeff, the police now seemed much more eager to help. That being said, for several days, at least one detective assigned to the case seemed fixated on the idea that Judy had just run off on her own to get attention. In a Boston Globe article published on April 14th, The detective acknowledged that Judy does not seem to be the type of person to just disappear, but also stated that it is not uncommon for a person of this age to have a midlife crisis and disappear for a few days just to see if anyone misses them. Judy's loved ones did not believe this was the case. It was out of character for Judy, and it did not make sense that she would choose to disappear from an unfamiliar city after traveling there with her husband when she could have just stayed home during his conference and left from her home, giving her a few days head start to get away before he came home and realized she was gone. Judy's children arrived in Philadelphia to help search for their mother. They spent days walking and biking around the city looking for Judy or any witnesses who may have seen her. Judy carried a distinctive red backpack which did help witnesses remember her. A hotel employee remembered her asking where to catch the flash bus. A driver on one of those buses did remember her boarding his bus at Front and South Streets sometime in the early afternoon. She got off the bus near her hotel. Later, she was seen entering and exiting a Greyhound bus terminal. It is believed she either just went in to use the restroom or she was looking into the bus routes that ran from the terminal to Chinatown, as she did love Chinese food. Judy's family was concerned that she may have hit her head or undergone some sort of trauma that had left her with amnesia or in some sort of dissociative state. Potential sightings of her indicated that these fears may have been merited. There was a potential sighting of her at 3:00 p.m. on the day of her disappearance near the intersection of Broad and Locust Streets. This is the earliest sighting where the witness claimed Judy was acting disoriented. 24 hours later, there was another potential sighting, and again the woman believed to be Judy was acting strangely and as though she were disoriented. A salesperson and a customer claimed to see Judy shopping for dresses at the Macy's in the Deptford Mall in Deptford, New Jersey, which was easily accessible from Center City, Philadelphia by bus. They were able to provide an accurate physical description of Judy, and even said the woman they saw was wearing a red backpack. However, they also described her as unstable. She was ranting and raving, but one of the topics she was going on about was her daughter. At one point, she said she was shopping for clothes for her daughter, but she didn't know why she bothered because her daughter always hated whatever she bought her. For Judy's family, this was a sign that the woman really was Judy, as this was something Judy had said in the past after buying clothes for her daughter Amy. The woman then unsuccessfully tried to convince a young woman to leave with her as she left the store. The salesperson saw her talking to the young woman and at first thought she was the woman's daughter, but she was not. Unfortunately, there was no surveillance footage from the store. Multiple sightings of Judy were also reported near Penn's Landing. However, the witnesses almost certainly all saw a local homeless woman who bore a striking resemblance to Judy. Even Judy's own son thought she was his mother when he saw her from across the street. The woman was routinely stopped by police officers who thought she was Judy. There were also reports of a disoriented and disruptive guest at 2 hotels in Society Hill, but police were called and they confirmed that she was not Judy. As time went on with no signs of Judy, police became suspicious of her husband. However, he was at conference functions surrounded by witnesses for almost the entirety of the time he was in Philadelphia. Police therefore theorized that Judy had never been in Philadelphia at all. Instead, Jeff had killed her in Massachusetts and hired someone to fly to Philadelphia under her name to confuse the investigation. Judy's presence in Philadelphia had initially only been confirmed by one hotel employee, although other people later came forward, reporting that they had seen Judy at the hotel after her disappearance was covered by the local media. A female detective who searched Jeff and Judy's hotel room claimed that it appeared a woman had never been in the room as there was no makeup or jewelry, and the only clothes missing were the ones Judy had worn the day before. However, Judy's children did not find this suspicious. Judy hardly wore any jewelry and almost no makeup, even for professional photos. She liked to travel with as little as possible, so she was a very efficient packer who got the most use out of what she did pack as possible. Judy's children and husband ultimately had to leave Philadelphia without her. They did not, however, give up the search for Judy. Jeff spent months calling police stations and hospitals up and down the East Coast looking for leads. He faxed missing persons flyers with pictures of Judy to hospitals and law enforcement agencies over the same massive portion of the country. His efforts did eventually pay off, as it was one of his flyers that led Dr. Davis to reporting the discovery of the remains that would prove to be Judy's to the police in Philadelphia. Once it was confirmed that Judy's remains had been found in North Carolina, investigators from the sheriff's office there began looking for witnesses in hopes of determining if Judy had been in North Carolina before her death, or if her remains had just been disposed of there. Ultimately, witnesses came forward claiming they had seen Judy in and around Asheville shortly after she vanished from Philadelphia. Two of those encounters were brief and involved Judy driving the same type of vehicle. The owner of Cromwell's Deli in Asheville identified Judy by her picture as a woman who had come into the deli to buy $30 worth of sandwiches and a toy train. The woman had been driving a gray sedan. The operator of the Big Cove campground also identified a woman who had stopped at the campground as Judy. She had driven up in a gray sedan full of bags and boxes and asked if she could sleep in her car at the campground. This was not allowed under the campground's policies, so she left. The most extended encounter with the woman believed to be Judy occurred at a Christmas shop at the Biltmore estate. Joanne Stucker, a clerk at the store, reported talking with Judy while she browsed the store wearing her distinctive red backpack. After the woman told Joanne she was from Boston, Joanne mentioned that she had a friend named Judy who lived near Boston, and the woman said that her name was Judy as well. She told Joanne that her husband was an attorney and that they had been in Pennsylvania so he could attend a convention when she decided to come down to Asheville. According to Joanne, the woman did not show any signs of being disoriented or impaired. They had a very pleasant conversation. These sightings seemed to indicate that Judy went to Asheville voluntarily. While this would solve part of the mystery of her case, it does raise plenty more questions. On a practical level, where did Judy get a gray sedan and all of the boxes full of items inside of it? She left Philadelphia without any of her belongings, and there was no activity on her bank accounts. So, how did she get the money to buy the car and the things inside? Even if it was a rental, how is it that there is no record of a rental under her name? The bigger question is, of course, why would Judy voluntarily disappear? One of Judy's friends, Carolyn Dickey, alleged in an interview for Unsolved Mysteries that Judy and Jeff's marriage was in trouble at the time of Judy's disappearance. She believed that Judy may have wanted some time away from Jeff. She pointed to Judy forgetting her license at the airport as potential evidence. Perhaps Judy had intentionally left it at home so she would have an excuse to be away from Jeff for a few hours. However, while today presenting photo ID to board an airplane is a well-known requirement, the regulation necessitating it for all passengers had only gone into effect roughly 18 months before Judy disappeared. While she was an experienced traveler, she had only traveled by air once since the regulation had gone into effect. Her family did not think it was alarming that she had not brought her driver's license when she first went to the airport because, again, she only brought what was absolutely necessary with her on trips. So, if she would not be driving during a trip, it would have made sense for her not to bring it with her. Jeff acknowledged that, like most couples, he and Judy disagreed occasionally, but he believed that she was happy with her life and their relationship. While Jeff and Judy had not been married for a long time, they had known each other for years, building a life and resolving issues as they came up. The couple had only been married for a few months at the time of Judy's disappearance, but they had been together for over a decade. When they first started dating, they both were raising children at home, so they waited until the children were grown and out of the house before they married. Judy's daughter Amy has only had positive things to say about her stepfather and has described him as being a very honest man. She has further stated that her mother loved Jeff and would not have put him through the ordeal of searching for her over any argument that they could have had. Furthermore, even if Judy were angry with her husband, why would she put her children through the hell of not knowing where she was? Jeff was not the only person she would be leaving behind by voluntarily disappearing from her life. The sightings of Judy in Asheville, particularly her interaction with Joanne at the Christmas store, do seem to indicate that Judy voluntarily traveled to North Carolina. Even though it is unclear as to why or how she did so, she did not appear disoriented when she was there, as she did during some sightings of her in Philadelphia, and she disclosed enough accurate details about herself to show that she was not suffering from amnesia, as her family had feared. Judy had no strong connection to North Carolina. She may have been there at some point traveling with a patient, but her family cannot remember for sure if she went to North Carolina or to Tennessee. Animal hairs were found on her remains, and Judy loved horses. There was a horse farm nearby, but investigators could never confirm that she had visited it. Why she went to Asheville is just as unclear as why she left Philadelphia. While the matter of where Judy went after she vanished from Philadelphia has some answers, there are almost no solid answers about who killed her. Jeff could confidently be eliminated as a suspect because he was morbidly obese and in poor health. So, there was no way he could have gotten to the remote slope where Judy's body was found. Furthermore, Judy's body was most likely brought to the site where she was buried. While she was dressed for hiking, she probably could not have hiked to the particular site where her remains were found due to the severe arthritis in her right knee. Jeff was not in good enough health to have carried or dragged her body to the site. Judy was very friendly and trusting. It would not be out of character for her to meet someone new and spend some time with them. She could have potentially been out in the national forest with someone she met while out on a walk and they attacked her. If Judy were killed by a stranger, there is no obvious motive for the crime. Robbery does not appear to be the motive, as $87 in cash was found in the pocket of the shirt found near the remains, and there was $80 cash inside of the blue nylon backpack buried near them. Police believe the backpack may have belonged to the killer. They also found a pair of high-end sunglasses that retailed for over $100 that they also believe may have belonged to the killer, as Judy did not spend a lot of money on items like that. The red backpack Judy carried has never been found. There is a theory that Judy may have been killed by Gary Michael Hilton. Hilton was a serial killer who was convicted of several murders that took place on hiking trails in national forests throughout the Appalachian Mountains. While Hilton did leave the body of one of his victims not far from the site where Judy's remains were found, his known killings did not start until October of 2007, over a decade after Judy was killed. The mystery of the final days of Judy Smith's life still endures nearly 30 years after her strange disappearance and death. She seemed to vanish into thin air, only to be found months later, hundreds of miles away under circumstances that raised more questions than they answered. To this day, no one knows how or why Judy ended up in North Carolina, or who was responsible for her death. Her husband, Jeff, died in 2005 without much more information than he had in 1997. While Jeff never found resolution to her case, hopefully her children someday will. Christy Chun was an only child, the light of her parents' lives. She was born in China, but she and her family immigrated to the United States when she was young, and she grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. Christy loved traveling, and her mother often accompanied her on her adventures. Christy was kind, generous, and outgoing, which helped her make friends easily wherever she went. Christy attended Johnson and Wales University, where she enrolled in their pastry program. After graduation, the new pastry chef moved to Denver, Colorado, where she opened the Sweet as Pie Bakery. Christy hoped the bakery would be an inviting gathering place for those in her neighborhood, and she served the classic Southern sweets she had grown up enjoying. New ambitions eventually brought her back to Tennessee. Christy wanted to become a pharmacist, so she enrolled at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center College of Pharmacy in 2021. She was awarded the Wolters Kluwer Clinical Drug Information Award of Excellence in Clinical Communication for superior verbal and written clinical communication skills. She graduated that same year and accepted a job as a pharmacist at a pharmacy inside of a local Kroger supermarket. Christy was close with her parents and was a joyful presence in the lives of her many friends. Christy's loved ones all knew that she dreamed of one day getting married and having a family. According to one of her friends, Christy would have made a wonderful mother, so these goals made perfect sense. However, it was surprising when Christy did get married, because her husband was a man she barely knew. Almost none of her friends had even met him prior to attending his and Christy's wedding reception on February 18, 2022. 36-year-old Christy married 38-year-old Bradley Robert Dawson, an IT specialist at Youth Villages, a Memphis nonprofit that provides support to at-risk youth. The following day, they held a small reception to celebrate their marriage with their families and closest friends. Their relationship had been a whirlwind romance. They reportedly met in November of 2021 and planned the wedding that took place just 3 months later. In just 26 days, Bradley had still been legally married when they started seeing each other. He had gotten married in 2019 and filed for divorce in September of 2021, 2 months before he met Christy. His divorce from his first wife was not finalized until January 11, 2022, just over a month before his wedding to Christy. While Christy and Bradley did not wait very long to get married, they did have to be more patient when it came to their honeymoon. For the occasion, they traveled to Fiji, where they stayed at the 5-star luxury resort at Turtle Island. The resort is made up of only 14 private villas, so they had to wait several months for availability to book one for their honeymoon. They arrived at the resort on July 7, 2022. By the following evening, July 8, while they had just started their trip, the honeymoon appeared to be over, figuratively speaking. The couple seemed happy for most of the evening, but then multiple witnesses saw them have a large argument at a dinner beach party. According to later statements from the Chin family lawyer, Christy learned that night that Bradley had been to the same resort with his previous wife 2 years earlier, and this appears to have been the cause of their argument. A guest staying in a nearby villa later testified that he had seen Christy and Bradley returning to their villa from the beach at approximately 12:25 a.m. on July 9th. About 15 minutes later, he heard loud banging coming from the couple's villa. He then heard one large bang and a single scream, followed by complete silence. The resort staff was notified of the noises coming from Christy and Bradley's villa, but they did not immediately investigate. Resort staff noted that there was a "Do Not Disturb" sign on Christy and Bradley's door. However, when the couple did not come to breakfast or lunch on July 9th, they became concerned. Around 3 p.m., a member of the resort staff went to the villa and knocked on the door. When no one answered, they entered the villa despite the "Do Not Disturb" sign. In the bathroom, they found Christy Chin Dawson unmoving. She was in a pool of blood, stuck between the wall and the smashed toilet, her arm caught in the cracked tank. The room was spattered with blood, and Christy was covered in broken glass. She was ultimately pronounced dead at the scene. Christy's husband Bradley was nowhere to be found. Police began an extensive search for him, but he remained missing for approximately 36 hours. Then he was found on Matakawalavu Island, a few miles away from the Turtle Island resort by water, smelling of alcohol and asking for police. A local man found him as he was walking towards one of the island's villages. He had arrived on the island in a kayak he had stolen from the resort. He was taken to the town of Nadi on the west coast of Viti Levu, the largest island in Fiji, where he was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. He retained a lawyer and refused to provide a DNA sample as requested by police. Dawson quickly began portraying himself as a victim, telling a reporter during a jailhouse interview that Christy was his everything and that he prayed for her every day. "What I can say is I am so sorry for the situation we are all going through now. We were supposed to have amazing holidays and I lost my wife. Just thinking she is not here anymore is so painful. I am thinking of her all the time. We were supposed to have an amazing life," he said. During the same interview, Dawson claimed that Christy's death had been an accident. He said that they had gotten into a drunken argument at the resort, but he could not remember what it was about. He was adamant that their relationship had never been physically violent before, but said that they had gotten into a scuffle when they got back to their villa. He claimed that Christy had shoved him and he had fought back. Christy ended up on the floor and he left the villa, taking a kayak from the resort and eventually making his way to Matakawalavu Island. He claimed that he had left in the kayak to give his wife some space after the argument, arguing that it was not unusual for him to go for a walk after a disagreement. Police did not believe his version of events. Neither the severe damage done to the bathroom in the villa nor Christy's extensive injuries were consistent with the simple scuffle he had described. According to the medical examiner, Christy's injuries were not consistent with a simple accidental fall. They were consistent, however, with her having been repeatedly assaulted. Christy's official cause of death was a traumatic brain injury. She suffered an extreme brain bleed. In addition, her arms were covered in bruises and cuts. There were deep lacerations near her eyes. There was severe swelling around both her eyes and mouth. There was a large laceration as well as numerous smaller ones on her back. Christy's parents traveled to Fiji after she was killed, hoping to have her body embalmed, so they could bring her back to Memphis with them for burial. Unfortunately, her injuries were too severe for this wish to be accommodated. The lacerations around her eyes specifically were so deep that embalming fluid would have leaked out of them, making it impossible to embalm her. Instead, her remains had to be cremated. In addition, police did not believe Dawson had simply gone out on the kayak to calm down after a fight with his wife. They instead believed that he had been attempting to reach Fiji's main island, so he could flee the country when he left the resort in the stolen kayak. When Dawson was found on Matakawalavu Island, he had over $1,000 in cash, both his and Christie's driver's licenses, Christie's credit card, and his passport. While he thought to bring those items with him, he left behind his phone and his GPS watch, which police believed was an intentional choice to prevent them from tracking his position electronically. When he was found, he did have cuts and bruises on his hands and feet, but they appeared to have been from him falling on the coral near where he came ashore. He had no injuries consistent with his wife physically assaulting him. Dawson provided his version of events in his initial interview to police, but he refused to sign his statement at the end of the interview, and his lawyer would legally contest it. Dawson pled not guilty to Christie's murder and publicly maintained his innocence. Dawson's lawyer tried to get him released on bail, arguing that it would be a miscarriage of justice for him to remain in custody when it could be up to 2 years before his trial began. Furthermore, they claimed that Dawson was not in good health and needed to be out on bail so that he could discuss his medications with his doctor over the phone. They also claimed that Dawson's mother was fully dependent on him and that she would mentally suffer if her son were remanded to custody and could not speak to her over the phone regularly. Prosecutors argued that Dawson was a flight risk. While he had surrendered his passport, they believed that his fleeing the crime scene in a kayak demonstrated his willingness to find alternative means to avoid appearing in court. Dawson's lawyer dismissed prosecutors' concerns about Dawson having no ties to Fiji by arguing that he would stay with family friends from America who were living there until his trial. Prosecutors argued that they would not be appropriate sponsors because these American family friends were people Dawson had just met on the day of Christie's death, and one of them was facing rape charges in Fiji. The judge agreed with prosecutors, and Dawson remained in custody awaiting trial. Dawson's 8-day trial was held in late September and early October of 2024. He did not testify on his own behalf, and his lawyers called no witnesses. Dawson's defense was centered around his new version of events that occurred just before he left the resort in the kayak, which differed from his initial statements to police after his arrest. He now claimed that Christie had fallen down drunk and caused all of her injuries herself. A verdict in the case was not handed down for several weeks. Ultimately, the court did not accept Dawson's version of events given the nature and extent of Christie's injuries. On December 11, 2024, Dawson was found guilty of Christie's murder. Dawson was formally sentenced on February 12, 2025. The law in Fiji mandated that he be given a life sentence for his murder conviction. However, it also required that a judge enact a minimum sentence after which Dawson could apply for parole. Justice Raj Hamza set that minimum at 18 years in prison for Dawson. Justice Hamza was highly critical of Dawson, his crime, and his actions after he committed it. Your conduct after the incident was appalling. Having inflicted serious and life-threatening injuries to the deceased, you fled the scene of the crime, leaving the deceased alone and helpless, he told Dawson at the sentencing hearing. Even if Dawson is initially denied parole after 18 years, he still has some hope of finding freedom and peace one day, which Christie's parents do not. Both of them provided victim impact statements at Dawson's sentencing. She was my only child, my little girl, and my reason for living. Each day since her death has been a struggle to find meaning in a life that now feels empty. Christie's father, Tae-chan, said in his statement, "No mother should have to know this is how her daughter's life ended, and by the hands of the very person who took a vow to love, honor, and cherish her. I can only hope that the rest of your life is filled with misery, loneliness, and despair." Christie's mother, Shi Leo, told Dawson during her statement, expressing a hope that I'm sure many of us share. Around 6 p.m. on December 29, 1979, the pilot of a forestry department spotter plane noticed smoke rising from brushland in Cagullan, a suburb of Perth, Western Australia. They had been in the area monitoring a brush fire. They discovered the horrifying source of the smoke the following morning in the Canning Dam catchment area approximately half a mile south of Brookton Highway. It was coming from a smoldering tree stump and the badly burned human body slumped over it. The body was that of 22-year-old Karen Tate. Her autopsy revealed extensive head and facial injuries. She had been beaten to death. Police believed a bloody chunk of wood found at the crime scene was the murder weapon. Karen had been born in Victoria in April of 1957, but her family had moved when she was just a year old, so most of her life was spent in Avalon Beach, New South Wales. She had a small circle of close friends, but a large group of social acquaintances. She was very comfortable being on her own and taking care of herself. She was kind, curious, and vivacious. Karen had moved across the country following a devastating loss. Karen was the mother of twin girls, but her daughter Amber died of sudden infant death syndrome in 1977 when she was just 5 months old. Karen left her other daughter with her father in Sydney and moved to Western Australia in 1978. In 1979, she was living on Barley Street in Mountley, but at the end of the year, she was house-sitting at a property in Carrigullen. Karen had spent the evening of December 28, 1979 at a dance held at the North Cottesloe Surf Life Saving Club. She then spent the night with some of her friends in Swanbourne. The following morning, Karen got a ride back to her Barley Street residence around 11 a.m. She was never seen alive again. What happened during the final 7 hours of Karen's life between when she left her friend's home and when the smoke coming from the fire that had been set to her remains was seen was a mystery to police. Trying to ascertain where Karen was and what she was doing during those hours was a major focus of the early investigation into her murder. Karen regularly hitchhiked, often enough that she carried a black helmet with her when she was out just in case she was offered a ride on a motorcycle. This, of course, led police to theorize that Karen had been killed by someone she had accepted a ride from. A young woman did call police with an anonymous tip, saying that she had seen Karen on the back of a man's motorcycle on the day of her death. Police made appeals for the woman to come forward and provide additional information, but she never did. Several burned items had been found in a rough semicircle around Karen's body, which led to fears that her death had somehow been connected to witchcraft. Rumors flew that jewelry Karen had been wearing had secret occult meanings and that she was a practicing witch. Individuals claiming to be white witches told the local newspaper that Karen's murder could be connected to black magic. These claims inspired some local hysteria, but they were all unfounded. Karen was very curious and open-minded, so she visited all manner of bookshops and was willing to listen to other people when they explained their beliefs, but she herself was in no way involved in the occult. Decades passed without answers in Karen's case. In 2023, the government of the state of Western Australia announced a $1 million reward for information in several cold cases, including Karen's, but the offer of the reward led to only a few calls and no solid answers. In 2024, Detective Senior Sergeant Steve Potter announced that male DNA had been found on items found at Karen's crime scene. The Western Australia Police Force's Special Crime Squad team was in the process of analyzing the DNA in hopes of identifying who it came from. The main technique they would be using was genetic genealogy. The effort was massive and time-consuming, for people worked on the case almost non-stop for a full year. They examined genetic profiles from the commercial DNA sites GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA and developed a family tree containing more than 10,000 people that went back to the 1600s. Most of the relatives of the killer initially identified by this effort were several generations removed from the killer. So tediously researching the links between all of the individuals in the family tree and expanding it took a lot of time and effort. In March of 2025, however, all of the work paid off. On March 13, 2025, Gold Case investigators with the Western Australia Police Force announced that they had been able to tie the DNA profile from Karen's crime scene to a potential suspect. As such, they were formally identifying Terrence John Pfizer as a suspect in Karen's murder. Unfortunately, that was all they could do as Pfizer had died of cancer 25 years earlier and therefore could not be arrested and charged. Pfizer was born on February 11, 1950 in Mount Lai. From 1970 until 1972, he served in the Australian Army. He spent the majority of his service stationed in Townsville. Fisher got married in 1973, but he and his wife divorced in 1981. The marriage did not produce any children. Around the time of Karen's murder, Fisher was living mainly in Rivervale and Manning. He then lived with his father in Manning until his death from cancer on August 27, 2000. He had no criminal record and had only ever interacted with police for minor traffic infringements. When police announced that Pfizer had been identified as a suspect in Karen's case, they also made another surprising announcement. They believed that Pfizer was connected to two other cold cases not previously tied to Karen's case, the murders of Carrie Turner and Barbara Western. If Pfizer did in fact kill all three of these women, he would be considered a serial killer. Carrie Suzanne Turner was born in September of 1972, the youngest of three children. In 1991, the 18-year-old was living with her parents in the suburb of Bickley and working part-time as a shop assistant. On June 29th, she and a friend hitchhiked from the friend's home in Armadale to Pinocchio's nightclub on Murray Street in Perth. Arriving there around 10:30 p.m., she became separated from her friend once they got inside. Carrie was seen socializing with many different people throughout the night until she left the club alone around 4 a.m. on June 30th. Carrie got into a taxi outside the club, but the driver soon realized that she did not have the money to pay her fare, so he made her get out on the causeway in East Perth. Multiple witnesses saw her sitting on the curb or trying to hitch a ride. Another taxi driver picked her up, but he also realized that Carrie did not have the money to pay him. So, he had her get out of his vehicle on Shepperton Road near Marr Street at approximately 5 in the morning. A vehicle traveling southeast on Shepperton Road was seen pulling up alongside Carrie. Witnesses reported that Carrie got into the car and it continued on. She was never seen alive again. Carr's parents reported her missing on July 1st, and she remained missing for almost a month. Her body was discovered in bushland in the area of Bedford near the Canning Dam, fully clothed and hidden behind a log. Barbara Ann Western was born in Perth on May 30th, 1948. She got married in 1967 and had 2 children, but the marriage ended after 5 years. Barbara then raised her children on her own. She had a very loving personality, which made her an attentive and caring mother, as well as a supportive friend to her wide social circle. Barbara began a new relationship 10 years after her divorce and began living with her partner a year into the relationship. But the couple did not marry. Barbara went out for the evening on June 27, 1986, leaving her home sometime between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. She saw 2 friends at the Balmoral Hotel in East Victoria Park and ran into an acquaintance. Later in the evening at the nearby Irene's Park Tavern, Barbara was wearing a distinctive orange parka that night, which helped when police were later looking for witnesses. Barbara was seen leaving the tavern around 11:30 p.m. She never returned home. Barbara remained missing for almost 5 years. On March 14, 1991, 2 people were out collecting wood near Canning Dam and Carrigoulan when they came across what they believed to be human bones in a clearing roughly 50 feet off of the trail. Several items, including items of clothing and pieces of jewelry that belonged to Barbara Western, were found under a nearby tree trunk. Police were able to confirm that the bones were those of Barbara Western. It is unclear why exactly police believe all 3 women were killed by the same person. The main detail connecting all 3 cases is the locations where the bodies were found. The sites where the bodies of Karen Tate and Barbara Western were found had less than 100 feet between them. Carrie Turner's body was found approximately 4.5 miles away from those sites. Investigators believe there was a specific reason why Carrie was taken there, although they have not yet made that reason public. Authorities in Australia normally do not release very much information about suspects before they are convicted of a crime in court. This case is unusual in that they have released quite a lot of information about Pfizer to the public. They are hoping that by disclosing the places where he lived, worked, and socialized, they will hear from as many potential witnesses as possible. Investigators are very interested in gathering information about Fisher's movements and his routines, as they believe this information will provide them with more definitive answers. In the 3 cases they now suspect him in. Pfizer worked in construction for the Public Work Department constructing government buildings in and around Perth. He took a voluntary redundancy in 1993 and started his own business. Pfizer was also a prominent member of the Fremantle Sailing Club, where he both socialized and participated in offshore racing. He spent the early 1980s building a yacht at a warehouse in Carroll and launched it in 1985. Pfizer was also known to frequent pubs in Carroll, Victoria Park, and Manning. Anyone who knew him from any of these places and could provide information about him is asked to contact Crime Stoppers. Police say that even the smallest of details could be critical to their investigation. In addition to making a public appeal for potential witnesses, investigators also executed a search warrant at the home where Fisher lived until his death on March 13, 2025. They began what would ultimately be a 5-day search of the property, which included digging up the backyard. According to a police spokesperson, several items from the property were taken into evidence, with some of them being sent for forensic examination. Karen's sister Annery and brother Matt gave an interview following Fisher's identification. They expressed gratitude to all of the investigators who worked on their sister's case, as well as relief that Fisher is dead, both because it spares them the trauma of going through a trial and because he can no longer hurt anyone else. They miss their sister and find some peace of mind in the answers they now have. That being said, they also implored anyone who knew Pfizer to come forward, as they could unknowingly be able to open up a new avenue of investigation that ultimately answers some of the remaining questions about what happened to Karen, Carrie, and Barbara. In 1969, 30-year-old Sharon Kenny was one of the most infamous inmates at the women's prison in Iztapalapa on the east side of Mexico City, where she was serving a 13-year sentence for murder. Her fellow inmates gave her the nickname La Pistolera, the gunfighter, which was adopted by the Mexican press as her notoriety grew. An investigator back in her home state of Missouri, where she had been tried 4 times for 2 murders, had dubbed her the pistol-packing mama. The residents of both Missouri and Mexico were fascinated by the young, beautiful woman and her scandalous crimes. However, Sharon would not obtain true international infamy until December 7, 1969, when she escaped from prison and became a fugitive. Her escape and the mystery of her whereabouts inspired both an international search and worldwide speculation. Her fate would remain unknown for more than 55 years. On January 30, 2025, the Kansas City Police Department and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office held a press conference in Missouri to inform the public that they had finally learned how La Pistolera had spent her decades running from the law. Sharon's extensive interactions with law enforcement had begun more than 9 years before her infamous prison escape. On March 18, 1960, that evening, 20-year-old Sharon and her family, her 25-year-old husband James and their 2 children, had plans to attend a church meeting. James went to take a nap around 3:30 and asked Sharon to wake him up at 5:30 so that they could leave for church. Just before that time, Sharon went into the bathroom in their home in an unincorporated area of Missouri that is now a part of the City of Independence to get ready for the meeting before waking up her husband. Sharon later claimed that while she was in the bathroom, she heard her 2- and 1/2-year-old daughter say, "How does this thing work, Daddy?" and then a loud gunshot. Sharon claimed that when she ran into her bedroom, she found her daughter with her husband's .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol in her hand and her husband with a single bullet wound to the head. James would be dead by the time he was transported to a local hospital. When police arrived at the scene, they did not perform any sort of testing for gunshot residue on the hands of either Sharon or her daughter. They could not pull fingerprints from the grip of the pistol because it was very well oiled. Neighbors and family members told police that James would let his daughter look at the guns he owned. The little girl was able to pull the trigger of a gun like the one that had killed her father when police performed a controlled test with her. Therefore, James Kenny's death was ruled an accident. Sharon collected $29,000, equivalent to more than $250,000 today, in life insurance money. Sharon spending some of that insurance money would ultimately lead to her being connected to another death. Sharon used part of the payout to purchase a Ford Thunderbird convertible, which brought her into contact with a married car salesman named Walter Jones. Just a few weeks after becoming widowed, Sharon began an affair with Walter and reportedly wanted him to become her second husband despite the fact that he had a wife and 2 children. On May 25, 1960, Sharon told Walter she was pregnant with his child. Instead of leaving his wife Patricia as Sharon had expected, Walter broke off the affair. According to some reports, Patricia was also pregnant at the time. The following evening, May 26, Patricia Jones never returned home from work. Walter filed a missing persons report with police and spent the following day looking for her. When he spoke to the women Patricia carpooled to work with, they told him that the previous day Patricia had received a phone call at work from an unknown woman who wanted to meet with her. They therefore dropped Patricia off at a street corner in Independence rather than at home as they normally did. They saw the woman who was waiting in a car for Patricia but did not recognize her and could only provide a very general description of her. As imprecise as the description of the unknown woman was, Walter immediately suspected that it had in fact been Sharon Kenny. He called her to ask if she was in fact the woman Patricia had last been seen with, and Sharon admitted that she had met with Patricia on the 26th. She told Walter that she had contacted Patricia to tell her about the affair she was having with Walter, but in later testimony Sharon would say that she had lied to Patricia and told her that it was Sharon's sister who was having the affair with him. Sharon claimed to have dropped Patricia off near the Jones family home and to have seen Patricia talking to a man in a green Ford as she drove away. Walter did not trust this account and later went to see Sharon in person and demand that she tell him where his wife was. She did not. However, after she saw Walter, Sharon called John Boldizes, a friend she had dated when they were in high school. She asked him to help her look for Patricia, which he was reluctant to do. Sharon convinced him to go out to a remote quarry road a mile out of town to look for her there. They found the body of Patricia Jones. She had been shot 4 times. Once in the head, once in the abdomen, and twice in the shoulders. John wanted to call the police, but Sharon ordered him to take her home and not mention her involvement with the discovery of the body to the authorities. John tried to comply with this order but very quickly had to divulge Sharon's involvement when he reported the body to police. Police spent the next several days conducting various interviews, administering lie detector tests, and searching for physical evidence at the scene. Sharon Kenny, John Boldizes, and Walter Jones were all investigated thoroughly. With Sharon connected to a murder, police also began looking into James Kenny's death again. It quickly became apparent that the Kennys' marriage had not been a happy one. Sharon had a number of affairs, including one with John Boldizes. The location where they had found Patricia's body was one where they had previously gone to park a car and engage in said affair. Sharon had been trying to get James to agree to a divorce before his death, but she was demanding both money and their house as a settlement. James's parents were devout Mormons who encouraged him to stay in the marriage. However, on the morning of his death, James had told them that he had enough evidence of Sharon's infidelity to secure a divorce without having to agree to her outrageous financial demands. Patricia Jones was buried on May 31, 1960. That evening around 11 p.m., Sharon Kenny was arrested for her murder. She would later also be charged with her husband's murder. Sharon's trial for Patricia's murder was delayed due to her pregnancy. She gave birth to a daughter, alleged by Sharon to have been fathered by Walter Jones, on January 16, 1961. Sharon went on trial for the murder of Patricia Jones in June of 1961. The prosecution presented 72 exhibits of evidence and 27 witnesses. The prosecution's case was circumstantial. The main problem with their case was the fact that they could not produce the gun that had killed Patricia. Patricia had been shot with a .22 caliber firearm, the same caliber that had killed James Kenny. However, the firearm that killed James remained in police custody despite Sharon's extensive efforts to have it returned to her. A man Sharon worked with did admit to buying a .22 caliber pistol for her on May 12, 1960, at her request. He had originally had the gun registered in her name but changed it to his own name after Sharon got upset with him and insisted he do so. However, Sharon claimed to have lost the pistol. A box that could have contained it was found in the Kenny home, but not the firearm itself. Police had searched the area surrounding the crime scene in hopes that it had been disposed of there but could not find it. While Sharon's co-worker's testimony showed that she theoretically had access to a .22 caliber pistol at the time of Patricia's murder, Without the actual pistol, they could not perform testing to see if it was a match to the firearm that had been used in the murder. On June 22, 1961, an all-male jury found Sharon not guilty of the murder of Patricia Jones. The courtroom erupted in applause when the verdict was read, and Sharon stopped to sign an autograph for one of the jurors on her way out of the courtroom. Sharon then went on trial for the murder of her husband in January of 1962. The prosecution argued that the Kennys' marriage had been about to fall apart due to Sharon's infidelity, and she knew she would not be entitled to any of James's life insurance money should they divorce before his death. The main witness for the prosecution was one of Sharon's lovers, John Boldizes, who testified that while he was sneaking around with Sharon a few weeks before James had died, she had offered him $1,000 to kill her husband and asked if he knew anyone who would accept the offer after he refused it. Sharon was found guilty on January 11, 1962, and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her husband, James. However, in March of 1963, the Missouri Supreme Court reversed her conviction and ordered a new trial on the basis of Sharon's defense, having been denied adequate peremptory challenges during jury selection in her original trial. Sharon was released from prison after her brother Eugene posted her $25,000 bail. Sharon's second trial for the murder of her husband began on March 23, 1964, but ended in a mistrial after just a few days when it was discovered that one of the jurors had previously retained one of the law partners of the prosecutor. Sharon's third trial for James's murder began on June 29, 1964. The jury was unable to reach a verdict, deadlocked at 7 votes to 5 in favor of acquittal, resulting in another mistrial. Sharon was set to go on trial for James's murder a fourth time in October of 1964 and remained free on the bail posted by her brother. However, a month before her trial was set to begin, Sharon left her children with James's father and left Missouri with a new lover, Frank Pliese. While the couple was not actually married, they traveled and registered at their hotels as a married couple, and Sharon began going by the name Jeanette Pliese. Legally, Sharon was allowed to travel under the terms of her bail, but under the terms of her agreement with her bond company, she was not to leave the state of Missouri without their written consent, which she never obtained. Sharon and Frank stayed at the Hotel Geneve in Mexico City, but on the evening of September 18, 1964, Sharon was across town at a different hotel with a different man. 35-year-old Francisco Paredes Ordóñez was an American citizen who had been born in Mexico and had returned there for vacation. He was staying at the Hotel Livada. That evening, he walked into the hotel with a woman and told the night clerk, Enrique Martinez Rueda, that she was his wife as they made their way to his room. Sometime later, Enrique heard a gunshot coming from Francisco's room and ran towards it. On his way, he saw Sharon leaving the room. When she realized Enrique was going to try to stop her from leaving, she shot him in the shoulder. Enrique was still able to stop her, grabbing the gun and pushing her back into the room where Francisco lay dead, shot twice in the chest. Enrique locked her in the room until the police arrived. Sharon claimed that she had gone to the hotel room with Francisco to look at some photographs after meeting him in a bar. She said that she had shot him with the intent to frighten, not kill him, when he made sexual advances towards her. The police did not believe her. They instead theorized that she had killed Francisco while she was attempting to rob him, as she and Frank had almost run out of money. She claimed to have shot Enrique because she believed he was coming to attack her. Francisco had been killed and Enrique had been wounded with a small gun Sharon had purchased after arriving in Mexico. However, when Sharon and Frank's hotel room was searched, police found a .22 caliber pistol. Testing of the pistol confirmed that it was the weapon that had been used to kill Patricia Jones. Despite a public outcry in Missouri and demands from the public that Sharon be retried for the murder, the prosecutor legally could not do so because of the double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment. On October 18, 1965, Sharon was found guilty of murder and attempted robbery and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Sharon appealed her conviction, but doing so increased her sentence rather than securing her freedom. 3 judges in Mexican Superior Court dismissed the attempted robbery charge, but found that Sharon's initial sentence of 10 years had been too lenient and increased it to 13 years. Because she had been in custody for Francisco's murder in Mexico on the day her 4th trial for the murder of James Kenney began, she obviously failed to appear in court for it. A capious warrant, An order to arrest an individual to ensure they appear in court after they fail to make a scheduled appearance was issued, but authorities in Missouri were content to allow Sharon to serve her full sentence in Mexico before executing it. They never had the chance to due to Sharon's escape from prison. The first indication that Sharon had escaped came at the 5 p.m. roll call on December 7, 1969, when Sharon failed to appear. She missed a second roll call later that evening. However, the prison did not notify Mexico City police of the escape until 2 a.m. At that point, a massive manhunt was launched. The search initially focused on the neighborhoods closest to the prison but would soon grow to a countrywide and then international search. The most intensive searches ended after only about 10 days, as Mexican officials believed that by that time Sharon would have already escaped the country. Numerous rumors flew about how Sharon had escaped prison. She had bribed prison guards. She had snuck out with the day's visitors dressed as a man. She had taken a prison guard as a lover. She had been helped by fellow prisoners or by the family of one of her victims who then killed her. There had been a blackout at the prison around the time Sharon would have escaped, and a review of the prison's procedures found that a door that should have been kept closed was routinely propped open and that the facility was understaffed. So Sharon's escape could have had a much more mundane explanation. Where Sharon went after she escaped would remain a source of international investigation as well as speculation for decades to come as authorities in Missouri continued to look for her and as public fascination with the fugitive grew. As the case continued to be covered in the media over the next 55 years, Sharon had become fluent in Spanish during her time incarcerated in Mexico, making any Spanish-speaking country a possible destination for her. A very early rumor held that she had escaped to Guatemala. Her main lawyer in Missouri owned a mountain ranch in Honduras, leading to speculation that she was hiding out there. Sharon's mother and brother had moved to Alaska, so some believed Sharon had followed them north. Despite ongoing efforts by police in Missouri, Sharon Kenny remained at large. She remained the subject of the longest outstanding warrant for murder in Missouri and one of the longest outstanding felony warrants in U.S. history. Authorities in Missouri announced to the public that the mystery of what had become of Sharon Kenny after she became a fugitive had been solved on January 30, 2025. However, they had actually confirmed her fate nearly a year earlier on May 31, 2024, the 64th anniversary of Sharon Kenny's initial arrest. The tip that had ultimately pointed investigators in the right direction came in December of 2023. The Kansas City, Missouri Police Department and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous tip claiming that Sharon Kenny had died on January 21, 2022, after living for nearly 50 years under an assumed name in Canada. Investigators learned that shortly after the death of the woman identified by the tipster as Sharon Kenny, a funeral home had taken 3 of her fingerprints, which were now stored in a database. They were able to subpoena these records. May 31, 2024, the day it was confirmed that Sharon Kenny and this deceased woman were one and the same, was the day that the fingerprints from the funeral home were matched to Sharon Kenny's fingerprints on file with law enforcement. Sharon had lived out her days as Deidre D. Gabbis in the small town of Tabor, Alberta. She had gotten married to a man named James Gabbis in Los Angeles, California, on February 2, 1970, less than 2 months after escaping from prison in Mexico. She and her husband moved to Tabor in 1973. They owned the Tabor Motel for some time, and then they both went on to work as realtors and owned the Century 21 agency in Tabor. At some point, Dee served as the chair of Tabor's Daycare Center Steering Committee. She has been described by Tabor residents as a kind and sweet woman. James Gabbis died on August 11, 1979, at the age of 38. He was a diabetic and an alcoholic who died at home after falling into a diabetic coma following a night of drinking. Dee remarried in 1982 to a man named William L. They remained married until William's death from natural causes at the age of 79 on April 7, 2011. Dee died on January 21, 2022, with no one in her community knowing her true identity. Authorities in Missouri did originally plan to announce that Sharon Kenny had been identified and that her case was now closed due to the fact that she was now dead in mid-2024, shortly after the fingerprint evidence confirmed that she was Dee Gabbis. However, they held off so as to, in their words, tie up some loose ends. It appears that there were some efforts made to further confirm that Dee Gabis and Sharon Kenny were the same person. The press release announcing the identification does state that forensic genealogy was used in making it, and it is known that Sharon gave birth in the years following her escape from prison. There is some more publicly available information about Sharon's family in Canada, as well as early failed efforts to use DNA testing to confirm the identification made in 2024. However, all sides of Sharon's family, both in Canada and in Missouri, do not want to be associated with her case any longer and have requested privacy. While there is a small amount of additional information available to the public, it is only about testing that never occurred, and it involves the identities and wishes of some members of the family. As such, I will not be going into detail about the potential use of DNA or other evidence in this case. There may or may not be further evidence confirming that Dee Gabis was in fact Sharon Kenny, but if there is, it is not public knowledge. So infringing on the privacy of her family members by discussing their identities or roles in the investigation does not serve any real purpose in the context of this video. As such, I will end on the words of unspecified members of the Kenny family in the form of a statement they have released through a spokesperson on the matter. On behalf of the Kenny family, we would like to state how happy we are that this chapter in our family history can be closed. Sharon was a woman that never faced the consequences of her actions, leaving them for her children to deal with. She caused great harm without thought or remorse. Hopefully, this closure will allow the family a chance to heal from her traumatic legacy.